This is a weird world first. A gas well delivering energy that isn't gas to heat our homes. This week we're looking at ideas on how you take our old oil and gas infrastructure and repurpose it for a renewable future. Also on the show, as Greta Thunberg is arrested protesting outside a London gathering of oil executives, we speak to someone who was on the inside.
Welcome to the UK, Greta!
We tell you why a boiler company is being investigated to see if it misled customers for marketing its boilers as hydrogen blend ready. And we meet the people turning classic MGs into EVs. And Mickey Carroll goes for a spin. This is an old gas drilling site in North Yorkshire that a few years back was due to be fracked, which led to a massive local story of protest. Now some of the same players are back working here, but this time they think it's a tale of redemption.
We say no! We say no!
In 2016, parts of Lancashire and Yorkshire became a magnet for protest. Campaigners drawn by the threat of fracking. Here, near the village of Kirby Misperton, there were 2 years of confrontation and more than 80 arrests. The site was surrounded by security to keep the opponents out, but now one has snuck back in.
Well, as a local resident, the proposal to frack in the area came along and I looked into it, and the industrialisation, climate change and getting away from fossil fuels really motivated me.
So how come now you're working with the guys, you're best friends with Russell, and you're actually working on the site?
Well, when we were campaigning, we had to say what the solution was.
And the answer they found was geothermal.
Sat with Russell, discussed it, and I'm here today.
And Russell, you were with the Third Energy, the company that was partly responsible for the wells here.
That's right, yeah. I mean, when I joined, we were still pumping gas out of the wells, but realised that wasn't sustainable and needed to find another use for the wells.
Yeah.
And so that's when I approached Steve and discussed the idea of geothermal energy. What
was a source of fear is now a source of hope.
Well, this is the actual well that was drilled for fracking. It's about 3,000 metres deep. But it was never actually used for fracking. The protesters were successful and Steve was successful in stopping that operation. So it's perfect for testing geothermal energy. There's hot water at the bottom. All we're doing is bringing it to the surface.
Geothermal energy comes from the heat of the Earth's molten core. Water in the well warms by 30 centigrade for every 1,000 metres down. Pump it up and you've got hot water on tap.
You hear so much of no, no, no all the time. We need to be telling people this can be done and how it can be done, and this is a solution here.
Here, their show home is a shipping container.
Let me welcome you into our mock-up home. So it was important for us to actually demonstrate to people how it's going to work in the home. It's one thing to tell them that we've got hot water coming out of an old gas well, but what we've done here is mocked up what it would look like in their home. Right. So we've got radiators that are being heated.
And these are nice and warm.
By the water from the well.
Stand here. Yeah. So the water from the well is heating these radiators?
Yes, it goes through there's a heat exchanger. So the water well is on a closed loop system. And then that heat exchanger then heats the normal housing system.
Russell's company owns this well and spent a generation supplying gas into Yorkshire, including backing fracking. But in 2019 underwent a green transition to be fossil fuel free. People are making a lot of profits in fossil fuels again. Do you feeling the temptation to go back?
No, not at all. I think once you've seen how this works and what the potential is, and you see people in the community come and fill the radiator and see the excitement, there's no interest in the company going back to fossil fuels.
Once commercially exploited, they reckon this well could supply 300 homes. So we'd need a lot more wells to keep Britain toasty. So here's how it works. They put a pipe like this down the middle of the old metal-lined gas pipe. Then they flow in cold water coming in through here down the outside of this, inside the metal, and then the hot water flows up this, out of there,
to heat a radiator.
We got 8 boreholes at 300 metres or something we're drilling.
This conversion of both mines and metal could be a game changer and is attracting a lot of interest.
And that could run at maybe 30 degrees, 35 degrees.
In this group are both academics and potential customers, some of over 100 industry visitors they've had in the last month.
Plenty of ideas?
Yes, we've got this anaerobic digestion project, which is geothermal here. And then we've got looking here more like a mini Eden type of botanical garden type project.
Oh!
And then even
A distillery.
a distillery, yeah.
Talking my language.
There are millions of small gas wells around the world, which geothermal developers Seraphy thinks are ripe for conversion, including a surprising number onshore in the UK.
We have something in the region of about 680 wells in the UK today, which are at the end of life or in the post sort of oil and gas phase that could be repurposed and reused for energy across the UK.
These black spots and rings are existing wells.
If we're using direct use heat from the ground as a natural resource, it's there 24/7, it's baseload, it's on demand, and it's infinitive, it's there forever.
So some companies are changing, but what about the locals? Many of them joined the protests, but a clean energy source is greeted quite differently.
We're absolutely delighted, and I think now the village has something positive to focus on, something that will provide local jobs. It does feel redemptive, that something that had been so bad, not just for the village, but actually for the environment and nationally, has completely turned full circle.
For now, geothermal energy is still very rare, but widespread, cheap extraction of energy from the Earth's core would be revolutionary.
While some gas companies, as we've seen, might be pivoting away from fossil fuels, most of them are not. And some of the big ones are gathered in this hotel in Mayfair behind me. And we've seen some of the executives have to run the gauntlet of protesters and scurry into the entrance there, because this is the Energy Intelligence Forum. Climate activists have been here all week, and Greta Thunberg hit the headlines after being arrested on Tuesday.
Welcome to the UK, Greta.
Well, we did ask the likes of BP, Shell, Aramco, Equinor and Exxon if their executives who were attending would speak to us, but none were available. But I have found someone who was inside, Mark Campanale from Carbon Tracker, who very much look at the finances and the shareholders' interest there. And you've got the lanyard that lets you in over there, Mark.
Yes, I have. Yes.
How was it?
Well, look, you know, it's like any conference. There's 300-400 people in the audience, stage presentations. The thing that probably shocked me the most is that of the 2 days of conversations I've listened to, it was a defense of business as usual. There was no scientists presenting at all on what actually the impacts of burning their products. There was nothing about the viability of carbon capture and storage. It was all, the mantra was renewables will not replace us.
Really?
Yes.
So
at the highest, most senior level.
So would you say they're kind of just not getting it?
I mean, I was able to sit at the top table for over one of the lunches and meet some of the oil and gas executives, is that they said to me, we want to find new ways of reaching out to the people outside.
What do we want?
I thought, well, why not start with the science, guys? Let's hear actually what's happening. The world's at the highest extremes of temperatures we've seen in recorded human history, and it's getting worse. This year will go down as with its fires and extreme weather events as probably the worst. Was there any discussion of that? No, there was not.
Just want to get a bit more understanding of the mood inside. I've got this slight kind of vision of a table with, if they'll forgive me, Bond villains around it.
Defensive. One of the chief executives of a major oil and gas company said to his audience, we're 83% of the world's energy, we demand our place at the COP. And there were puffing over the British government when there was a COP in Glasgow, refusing them entry. They're saying we're going to be at the next COP. I mean, it's not just ourselves at Carbon Tracker. People are calling this the oil and gas COP, and they see themselves as part of an entrenched energy system. Defensive, and in one of the rooms I heard one of the oil and gas executives said, oh look, the protesters, Greta, is only doing this for fame and fortune. I was thought to myself, that's shocking. You're doing it for fortune. Greta is doing it to bring the world's attention to the climate crisis. And to not take this protest seriously is to misread not just the society, it's to misread the science, it's to misread the global mood about climate change.
So they were aware of the protesters outside.
Oh, yeah.
Did people talk about it?
Everybody was talking about it. Of course, they did not like the personalisation of the walk of shame outside the building in front of all the protesters, which I had to walk myself. And I'm myself, and I'm used to this. I was shaking. I think many of them felt it personally, and perhaps you do need to feel it personally to realise just how serious the situation is.
Thanks very much, Mark. Great insight from the inside. We're going to look at a part of the low-carbon economy which arguably is on track here, and that's the electrification of vehicles. And if you're a fan of old classics as well, here is a really interesting development. Mickey Carroll's been to see how some of those things that I'd love to have driven are now being electrified.
Welcome to the toy shop, Mickey. What we've got is a production line, if you like, of converting classic cars to electric.
Owning a classic car is a sensory experience. Purists say it's the feel of the leather, the smell of the fuel, the growl of the engine that brings a classic car to life. But here, that growl is silenced.
The process starts down this end of the workshop, where all the dirty, smelly stuff gets dropped off. Okay. So our engines, gearbox, fuel tanks, exhaust, etc., all comes off near the door so we can throw that out really quickly.
This Ferrari Testarossa, one of 3 in the workshop, this Maserati Ghibli, first seen on the stage of the 1967 London Motor Show, this Land Rover, all getting their old engines replaced with electric motors and lithium-ion batteries. In fact, around 40% of the batteries Richard is putting into classic cars are recycled from other, usually crashed, electric cars. They've used so many, they've exhausted the UK supply of second-hand EV batteries.
We're future-proofing the classic cars to be able to be used, if you like, regularly in the 21st century. But for me, it's less about that. It's more about being able to have the confidence to get into a classic car and use it as a daily driver. My cars are daily drivers and they're classic cars. I don't have a modern car. In fact, one of my daily drivers is outside if you want to go and have a spin in it. So to turn it on, just literally turn the ignition key on. You put foot on the brake to put it into D. Yeah. And then take your foot off the brake, but very gently press the accelerator. Take your foot off. There you go, and you're away. Under the power of electrons.
How exciting. There's around 1.5 million classic cars on British roads, but they're high maintenance, the parts are hard to find, and the fuel is dirty. So why not just rip out the engines and put in something clean? We went down the road to a more traditional classic car workshop to speak to some petrol heads who aren't totally convinced by electric classics.
Purists would argue, and traditionalists would argue, that it came out of the factory with that engine, so really to restore it with an electric motor just doesn't seem right.
Many in the vintage car community aren't keen on electric classics. The mechanics here have been restoring vehicles for decades, and although they can see the value in making them cleaner and more reliable, it's the old engine experience that they love.
It's basically the sound, the speed, the noise, the smells, which, whether you'd get that with electric cars, they're more practical obviously, but then I think there's scope for a bit of both, I think, perhaps.
Purists decide future-proofing these old classics could keep them on the roads for longer, making them both sexy and sensible. Mickey Carroll, Sky News.
We're off to a break now, but when we come back, we look at why a major boiler manufacturer is under investigation for allegedly misleading consumers about the greenness of its products. Welcome back to the show and to Sky's newsroom. And as I'm here, because I'm about to have a chat with Tom Clark. Here he is, beavering away, Sky's science editor. Good to see you. Good to see you. Now, you've been looking, amongst other things, at the future of home heating. Lots going on this week.
So this week we had the report from the National Infrastructure Commission. Now, this is the body that advises governments, all governments, on their big infrastructure priorities or what they should be. Every 5 years they come out with one of these. It deals with the rail network, the road network, water companies, but the real emphasis this time was on home heating. The fact if we're going to meet our very fast approaching carbon targets in 2035, the interim ones, we have really got to sort out how we heat Britain's domestic buildings. And they're recommending it's goodbye to gas, and we have to roll out with some urgency and a lot of public support heat pumps into those homes that run on electricity, and therefore get rid of fossil fuels.
But this is really fascinating because we've just seen the government slightly put off the dates, the target dates for transitioning towards heat pumps.
That's right. So we saw Rishi Sunak a month or so ago concerned about how voters might be feeling that these things are being imposed on, saying, well, we're going to give you a bit more time. We're going to give you it was going to be a 2030 phase-out target for boilers. They've given 5 more years for that. So yeah, a mixed message, but now a very clear message from their infrastructure advisors. No, you've got to make a faster decision, roll out the support system there needs to be for heat pumps and get them into people's homes.
And did they leave any window for hydrogen? Because that's what we've heard from some people, that's the way of carrying on burning stuff in your homes. You just make it hydrogen instead. What did they say about that?
And this was another very significant conclusion they came to. There is no place, they concluded, for hydrogen in domestic properties.
Now, as black and white as that?
Very, very clear. Hydrogen won't go through the existing gas infrastructure, so the cost of replacing all that are just too high from an infrastructure point of view. And then when it gets into your home, into a boiler that's burning that hydrogen, once you've made the hydrogen using electricity, piped it all the way to the home and then burnt it to heat it, it's 5 to 6 times less efficient than a heat pump would be.
Just to be clear, I mean, are they a kind of lobby group, the National Infrastructure Committee? Kind of how much gospel, if you like, how much credit do we give them?
Well, they are meant to be the independent advisors. They look at the costings of these various infrastructure investments. So I think you can look at what they see as pretty agnostic in terms they don't really mind either way, but they are bearing in mind other policy and legal obligations the government has, and one of those, of course, is climate change targets. And the only way to get there, they're saying, is the heat pump route for homes.
There was also some news this week about how boilers are being sold and whether that was being done in a fair way.
That's right. So given the government is still making a decision as to whether to put a blend of hydrogen, 20% of hydrogen into the gas grid to try and make it a bit greener, boiler companies have been marketing their products as hydrogen blend ready, that they're ready to burn this stuff. And perhaps suggesting consumers that they're getting a newer, better product that's somehow going to be greener in future. So what an investigation by my colleagues here at Sky found was some of these claims about hydrogen-ready boilers aren't really that well founded, given, in fact, any boiler made in the last 30 years is more than capable of burning gas mixed with 20% hydrogen. So is that misleading consumers that the product they're getting is somehow better or newer or even more environmentally friendly? And now just this week, the Competition and Markets Authority have said they are going to investigate Worcester Bosch, which is a leading manufacturer of boilers here in the UK, to see whether some of the claims it's made in advertising those products are fair or are misleading. And they've also written to other boiler manufacturers to warn them about some of the wording that's been used around all of this. So for their part, Worcester Bosch say that they're aware of this investigation and are going to cooperate with the CMA as it looks into it.
It does feel like we're getting to the sort of the cutting edge, the slightly angry edge of what's happening with home heating, with companies making claims, government feeling the heat, public a little bit confused. I mean, it's beginning to really matter now, isn't it?
I think, yeah, it's starting to really matter in that if we're going to meet any of our climate change targets, we need to get on with it. If we're going to avoid the incredible volatility of prices that we saw during the gas squeeze we had because of Ukraine recently, we need some sort of solution. Yet people are, I think, being left quite confused by this. We've got big, important, independent bodies like the National Infrastructure Commission saying we need to go all out for heat pumps, but we've got the government saying, oh, we might have to delay that a bit. We still don't have clarity as to whether there's a future for gas, and that's an extremely expensive asset that people are having to make decisions on what next heating system to buy, yet no clear signals for industry, and most importantly, I think no clear signals for customers, for those of us at home not knowing what sort of heating system we're going to need to rely on for the next 20, 30 years. And these are big investments that are on those sorts of timescales.
Thanks for that. And we're going to go off to a different story, but one that you know about, the mysterious death of crabs and lobsters up in the northeast.
Yeah, with a lot of mystery about what might have caused it.
And now the fishermen involved, trying to boost the sustainability of their business, are actually breeding and releasing baby lobsters. And Shingi Mararike has been to a hatchery.
This is Whitby, a picture-perfect town on the northeast coast. Here, lobster fishing is vital, helping to keep jobs and businesses afloat, which is why in a hatchery just meters from the seafront, they're trying to protect and preserve future stocks of the crustacean, a project being led by Joe Redfern.
We have dispensation from the Marine Management Organisation to allow certain boats to bring the hens into the hatchery so we can process the eggs here.
Here, in precise conditions, lobster are hatched, fed and nurtured.
This is what we call the development room, and you can see first off we have these upwelling vats, so there's 12 in here, and you can see this is where the first stop for the lobster larvae.
After around 2 weeks they become juvenile. They're then separated to stop them feeding on each other.
And that's when they actually start developing claws, and they look a lot more like what you'd expect an adult lobster to look like. So you can see these guys in here. And then this is the last step before we then releasing them back out into the sea.
The idea is to replenish the thousands of lobster caught by fishermen each year.
So our aim is to try and build in some resilience and some sustainability to the fishing industry. What we've seen is a big boom in the amount of pots in the water and potting effort from the fishing fleet, and indeed the amount of lobsters being landed, so a 400% increase in the last 15 years. It's very much on a boom cycle, and we're here to try and make sure that doesn't come crashing down at the other side.
Doing that isn't just their responsibility though. The Marine Conservation Society wants to see greater government support and investment.
Lobster fishing, sadly, across the UK isn't in great shape, and at the minute we think the management isn't ambitious enough to help the stock. So if you can get that recovered stock with good management and good data in place, add the hatchery on top of it, then you've got a recipe for success.
A process that starts with the work of passionate people like Joe, but he accepts they can't be the only solution. He's calling for a national network of hatcheries doing more research.
Releasing these 558 lobster back into the North Sea is about a bigger picture aimed at benefiting both the coastal community and the environment. It's hoped that boosting and conserving lobster stocks will help a local fishing industry heavily reliant on them for income.
Improving how lobster stock is managed is the challenge. Doing so could preserve not just their future, but also some of Britain's fishing towns too. Shingi Marike, Sky News, Whitby in North Yorkshire.
Now, before we go, you may remember the Tree of the Year contenders we featured back in August. Well, the UK has had its say and crowned Wrexham's 480-year-old sweet chestnut its winner, with a whopping 17% of the votes. The giant tree is a symbol of resilience in the city, having weathered post-war plundering of the park for firewood in the 40s and dozens of deadly storms. And the chestnut will now be entered in the European Tree of the Year contest. Get behind your chestnut. Well, that's it for this week. Remember, you can catch up on all your climate and environment news on the Sky News website and app, or by scanning the QR code that's on your screen right now. We are now off for a week and we'll be back in a fortnight. See you then.